Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Asif, and I would be, conducting this session of, performance tuning. There would be two parts of this webinar. One would be of performance tuning, and one would be the next section would be of performance testing, which Nabil would be covering up. So I'll start with this performance tuning, and what we'll start with the objectives of this webinar or this session. In terms of the performance tuning. So the first objective would be explain performance with the development life cycle of typical WebSphere commerce application. So we'll go through high level parameters which a typical WebSphere commerce application would require, in terms of performance tuning, in terms of there are point of times where there's a peak season. So we would go through all those scenarios, those and along with the parameters of what are the required parameters which one has to look, for in terms of doing the performance tuning of the application. We would be covering the caching. Like the second objective is show how caching, profiling, and performance tuning are considered in all phases. So caching, profiling, I mean, in terms of caching, which would be which is a major contributor in terms of WebSphere commerce application performance. And we would be looking at two sides of caching. One would be a client-side caching, another would be a server-side caching, because these two caching makes your response time quicker, or the one which customer expects from the commerce application. The third would be explain the performance testing methodology, where it is going in future. So that part would mostly be covered by Nabil. And then again, I mean, get you thinking about performance all the time in terms of the application which you guys are supporting or which you have in-house or on the cloud, how your application is performing, the parameters which we would be discussing in this session, and the ones which are the same parameters, how they are configured in your application. Okay, so now, whenever we create a WebSphere commerce environment, I'm just giving or starting from the scratch, from the zero, so that those attendees or those those guys who have joined, in terms of, like, if they are creating a new WebSphere commerce environment, then what are the steps which they have to look at before even their site comes up, and before they come across any of the performance issues. So these are kind of a prerequisite which every organization has to look at. First is, like, validate, define hardware sizing. I mean, and these 3 points which you can see currently in this slide, the hardware sizing, workload, mix, and volume, like the volume of the workload, the volume of the number of requests which hits your site during the normal season, and then again during the peak season, and even during the peak hours within that normal time. So these are dependent with each other. Like, you as a company needs to do your sizing, decides on your hardware sizing based on these parameters, which are, like, the volume of your request, the volume of the customers which comes on your site, uh, you know the volume of the guest and registered customers which comes on your site, the volume of the number of orders which are being placed in a year or in a month or on the daily basis. So these are the parameters which actually decides your hardware sizing. Based on these parameters, you get the right sizing from IBM or its resellers. So the second one is document the hardware for production versus what is going to be used in the performance testing. So ideally, I mean, for our customers, we want them to have a similar kind of environment, to have a replica of the production as their test environment, where we are going to do the performance testing, because the results, if we will have a replica of the production in terms of the hardware resources or a software which are installed on production, if we have a replica of a performance server or a test server, we would get exactly the same results which we would expect on the production during the peak load time, when we would be doing a performance testing on the test server. So before we go into this, I have one document, one hardware sizing document, just to let you know guys how the hardware sizing document looks like. So this is a IBM document. One of our customers got this, or whenever, for example, if you want to go for the IBM WebSphere Commerce product license, IBM first asks you that all these things, and based on that they give you the sizing. Now what IBM needs from the customer, what IBM asks from the customer is, like, for example, customers tells IBM that, okay, we have, like, for example, 3 levels in the catalog, 2 sites, 100,000 items in the catalog, 20,000 items in the private catalog for each extended sites, 12 products per page, 85% cache hit ratio. So these are all the kind of requirements which you give to IBM when you purchase WebSphere Commerce IBM license from IBM. 90% of the pages are dynamic, 6-page views per session, 98% browsing, 2% ordering, 2,500 total visits per hour at peak. So this is the information which you are telling to IBM. Okay, we will have 2,500 total visits per hour in the peak hours. We will have 50 total. We will have, like, on average of 50 orders during the peak hours. So this is the information which these are all the parameters which IBM asks, and then you have to give this information to the IBM. Based on that, IBM comes with the sizing. Now this is the sizing which IBM gives. Like, for example, the hardware which you should have, or which customers should have one web server. This is like the 3-tier production environment, where one web server, one commerce server, and then one database server. And these are the configuration in terms of the hardware, processor, memory, which you should have for this to accommodate or to address these sizing parameters which you have shared with IBM. So this is one of the sizing document samples which I just wanted to share with you. Okay, now let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so performance testing. Use the RPER for similar metrics. You can determine the ratio that the performance environment of production. Locate and document the column used to determine the hardware and CPU sizing from the pre-sales team. So this all correspondence you have with the pre-sales team, and you provide all the parameters, or being a customer, we provide all the parameters, all these values to IBM. And then based on that, the document which I just shown you, this would be a kind of a sizing document which IBM comes with, based on the parameters which we give. If the numbers are the same, then your goal is to achieve the model defined by commerce. If the numbers are different, make sure to highlight this to the right people. So right people in terms of the IBM pre-sales team. Once testing is complete, a true hardware sizing can be given. Establishing workload mix and volume is the most important element of the testing. Utilize data for the web server's logs. Now, for example, I'm creating a website on WebSphere Commerce. I'm migrating, or I'm moving my environment, let's say, from any other technology to IBM WebSphere Commerce. Then how I would give these parameters to the IBM. So these are some some checkpoints where you can go and check that like, for example, web server logs can tell you the number of requests in an hour, the number of requests which are hitting to your web servers, how many requests out of those total requests in a peak hour are like of static contents, how many those requests are of dynamic content. So all this information you can get it from the web server logs. Plus, for example, what is the current response time which you have for those pages on that product, and once you would be moving to the IBM WebSphere Commerce, what response time you want. So this web server logs can give you all these details of, in terms of the response time, in terms of the number of requests which are hitting on the site. Utilize data from tools like Omniture, Core Metrics, Google Analytics. Now these are the analytics tools, analysis tools, which gives you the numbers of, like, for example, how many guest users have hit your home page, then how many users have went to the product detail page, how many users have clicked on add to cart, how many users have submitted the order, how many users have, let's say, reached to the checkout page but they have not submitted the orders, how many users have gone to let's say my account page, how many are the registered users. So these are all the numbers, or for example the number of hits in your peak hour. These are all the numbers, or the number of orders being placed in your peak hours. These are the numbers which these tools can provide you. But again, I mean, these core metrics, Google Analytics, these are the licensed tools which which you have to buy separately. Core metrics was one at one time was the part of the IBM WebSphere Commerce. Currently, also it is a part of the WebSphere Commerce with the name Digital Analytics. So, but it is a separate, it has a separate license. Google Analytics is a tool which is free up to some licenses, but then again it has a cost once you cross that limit. Utilize data provided by the business. Again, I mean, the business, like your business team, your store admins, your dealers can provide you more data in terms of how the app, application works in terms of the business, from the business perspective. Like for example, what like what they want to see on the search pages, so that makes customer to click on add to cart. So these are the some tips or tools which can be utilized, which can come from your business teams and can be utilized when calculating these numbers. Utilizing the data from today to build the mix, number of guest users versus registered users. As I mentioned that you can, using these tools, you can get these numbers, that how many guest users are hitting on your site, which pages they are navigating to, how many guest users are placing an order versus how many registered users are placing an order, average number of items in a cart which customer adds. Like for example, if there are 100 orders being placed, then what was the average number of items each cart had. So this is these kind of numbers you can get using these tools. How many carts were removed before even they checked out. You can get the reports in the form of like how many orders have been placed in a month, how many number of users hit on your website during the month, in a 1 month time, in a 6 months time, or in a year time. Using so based on these numbers you can predict, actually, like it says, using predicted peak hour volumes, you can predict how many requests or how many users came on your website during the peak hours, during the peak season as well. Plus you can also predict based on these numbers that, for example, during the non-peak season, if you are having let's say 1,000 orders per month, then you can predict, okay, based on these numbers, what would be the conversion rate when we will have a peak season or when we will have any festive season. So these tools would give you all these analytics which you would need once, for example, if you are creating your website, or if once you are looking at doing a performance tuning of your website before a peak season starts, or if you are coming across any issues even during the normal hours or the peak hours during the normal non-peak season. So these are the numbers which one has to look at. It is important to define the key objectives of testing. So for example, before you start performance testing, now I'm just touching a bit on the performance testing. Before you start performance testing, or before even you start performance tuning, you should have some baseline numbers. For example, and that can come from your customer, then that can come from your own organization, from your business team, that for example, we want the home page to be loaded in 3 seconds or 4 seconds or 5 seconds, and we want this data to be available on the home page. Or for example, we want at least the header should come within a second. What would be the first byte time? What should be the complete load time of the page? How when sooner browser can start server can start sending the response and showing it and that can be displayable on the browser. So we should have all these baseline numbers with us before we start testing or before we start tuning. And based on those numbers, then we will see that what are the parameters which requires tuning. And again, I mean, as I said in the start, that can be tuned from both the sides, server side and from the client side as well. It depends on, it depends on the performance analysis, that which parameters first requires tuning. So expected response times, browser response time, buyer response times, backend response times. Now backend, when I say backend response time, it means when the request comes from the browser to the server, from the web server to the application server. So from the backend, I mean the application server, the actual server which actually executes your servlets, your Java classes, your commands, and the database also, that how quickly the database is responding, and then how quickly the application server is responding, and plus how how much your cache is stable and solid on your WebSphere application server. Expected system utilization, so web server, application server, database. So these are the actually three main tiers. If I include Solar, that is actually again at the back end, it is an application server. So these are the tiers which are which plays an important role, whose parameters plays an important role in any websites, in any WebSphere commerce website response time. Network, again, I mean, network is also plays an important role in terms of how your network has a bandwidth of accommodating number of requests over the internet. Like for example, if your network is too small, and if you have tuned your parameters, WebSphere application server parameters or web server parameters to accommodate large number of requests, but at the network layer, your requests are not able to through to that web server, then it means that there are changes needs to be done at the network level before you go at the web server or the at the application server level. Okay, caching needs to have a formal design document, just like any other function on the side. Now see, caching is something which sometimes can create problems on the side as well, if it is not well designed, if it is not thoughtfully designed, if it is not pre-planned before you go and implement the caching. Being a experienced person in this field, what we have done, like for example, if you already have if you know that your website, your commerce website, B2C website or B2B website is using almost out of the box JSPs, you are using out of the box commands, then IBM also provides some samples, cache spec.xmls for B2B and B2C stores, which you can take them and start, take them as a starting point, keep them in your lower environments, and then use your cache monitor and see how much caching you are actually getting from when the request goes to the server. So those sample cache spec.xmls can be taken as a starting point for the caching. Now again, I mean, in WebSphere Commerce, since version 7 feature pack 6, IBM has introduced data caching. Before that there was only DynaCaching, but now the introduction of data caching from IBM has given a lot of advantage in terms of your data, especially in terms of the B2B side, where for example the customers who are logging can see the different prices, different categories, different catalog. So over there, the role of the data caching has become very important, has contributed a lot in terms of the server response time as well. So both like data caching and DynaCaching needs to be tuned. For data caching, you have the cache instances defined in the WebSphere application server. Plus, there is one cache instance.properties file which needs to be which just needs to be tuned as per the requirement. For DynaCaching, that the same cache spec.xml is being used for Dyna servlet caching. So the server-side caching is something which which can greatly enhance your application response time. We had experience in the past where, for example, if as I said, even if there is a syntax error in cache spec.xml, you would see in the system out log at the server startup that your cache spec is even not loading, and your site would be, would be very, very slow. I mean, would be giving you a very hard time in terms of from the customer's perspective. The page would load very slowly. If you're, for example, if you if you have a custom JSP, and that custom JSP you are not caching it, there is a possibility of caching that JSP, or there is a possibility of caching even the portion of that JSP. You must cache it via via cachespec.xml. So caching, server-side caching can greatly enhance your, it's like a backbone of your WebSphere commerce site performance. Okay, then describe the cache system: application server caching, web server caching, Akamai. So these two things, like that, DynaCache and DynaCache, they covers the server-side caching. From the client-side caching, you have to make changes in your IBM HTTP server, httpd.conf, the configuration file. You can, I'm just talking about some high-level parameters. I'll just talk about some high-level parameters. Like, for example, maximum connections your web server can handle, maximum concurrent request your web server can handle at the same time. Your number of threads per child process, your keep alive settings, your cache expiry headers. So these are all the client-side caching parameters which you have to look at. Plus, there is one other another important parameter is, like, your compression of the response. Like when the server, like for example, when the server is sending a response to the browser, and if the response size is, let's say, 1 MB, and or 5 MB, if that 5 MB is coming, in the form of bytes and without the compression, then it would take more time. Your page would load a lot slower than if you compare to make that change in your web server configuration file, make that server response to send it in the compression format, in the gzip format. That would be lot quicker than the server sending a response without the compression. Akamai is again a CDN. Like, for example, if you want to implement a CDN on your website, which would also greatly enhance your server load time, because there are two factors. One is all your static contents, including CSS, JavaScripts, images, would be loading from a separate CDN server, and that CDN server would actually cache your contents. And it means, now, for example, if I just talk about WebSphere Commerce website, there are, let's say, 100 requests which are loading on the home page, and out of those 100 requests, let's say there are 70 or 80 requests which are based on which are made of just static contents like images, CSS, JavaScripts. So it means those 70 or 80 requests are not touching your web server. They are going to the CDN, and already those contents are cached, and they are getting served very quickly from the CDN. And plus, the load is also getting reduced from the web server as well as from the application server. So only the dynamic data would be hitting to the web server and the application server to get that come back from the server to the browser. So CDN really can improve your website performance, and especially for the B2C stores, CDN is like I would say like 70 or 80%. It would give you a great improvement on your website if the CDN is being used by a B2C stores. For the B2B stores, again, like you do a thoughtful design of the server side caching. For the B2B stores, for a B2B extended sites, when you buy a CDN, you'll have to see what contents you need to cache, because for the B2B sites, for the extended sites, you want customer, when they log in, they see different categories based on their contracts, different prices based on their contracts. So in that way, for B2B, you have to see what data can be cached on the CDN and what data cannot be cached on the CDN. Data replication services, again, how your data can be if, for example, if you have a production, which most of the time or almost every customer has their production environment in the clustered in the clustered form, in the horizontal clustered or the vertical clustered form, then how you are how the data is being replicated from the one server to another server, how the data is being invalidated. Like, for example, if one customer is logged in and his requests are going to the server 1, then how, and if he has logged out, then that invalidation, that session, that log out activity should be replicated to the other servers as well, so that he should not get the stale data when he log in back again. So this invalidation is also very important in terms of so that customer cannot see any fake data or any data which is a stale data, which actually resides on any one of the servers if you have not defined this data replication services or data replication domain at the application server level. This is also a server side. Okay, document caching methods acceptable for this project: servlet, JSPs, commands, objects, registries. So servlet, JSPs, these cachings are these cachings are this caching is being done in the DynaCache, in the cache spec.xml. For command caching, now IBM, as I said, that has introduced the data caching. So most of the data caching covers this command caching, which previously was the part of the cache spec.xml. Whatever commands which you have there in the cache spec.xml, and if those commands are being used as a data cache instances, then the one which are being used as data cache instances will be used. The one which are defined in the cache spec are not being used anymore. Okay, so document invalidation method. So with the multiple options, like you can define triggers, like for example, if when the new catalog is being loaded, then the invalidation should be triggered so that the previous prices or the previous product cannot be seen by the customer. You have the option of setting a fixed timeout values in the cache spec.xml, so that after that timeout the caching gets invalidated. So these are options which you can use in terms of the invalidating the cache. You can directly, there's a cache IVL table, you can directly run queries on that table. You can, there's a command as well invalidating to invalidate the cache. There's a URL which you can call, which can invalidate the cache and make entries in the cache IVL table. Now let's talk about some profiling of WebSphere commerce application. Profiling Java code to identify underperformance functionalities, modules, and inefficiencies in design and code. Now profiling actually gives you a way of looking at your application. If, for example, if you have any leaks in your code, for example, if there are any bottlenecks, if there are, for example, if you are facing issues in terms of high CPU utilization, and you came across a kind of a code which is actually giving you this problem. So profiling is a way where you can actually monitor the flow of the execution of your code, and you can drill it down or narrow it down to the code where the problem actually lies. And this, I mean, there are tools available which you can use, like for example, but again, those are some licensed tools: AppDynamics, Monetis, New Relic. These are the tools which drills you down up till that database query which is giving you a problem, or up till the method, the Java class method which is giving you that problem, which has a code, which has a, let's say that what is the custom code which is giving you a kind of a memory leak or high CPU execution. So as I said, like you can trace SQL activity, that which SQLs are giving you a problem or giving you a performance bottleneck. Your CPU is going higher because of that. Let's say SQL is not properly written, or let's say if it is giving you a number of records which are when the server is fetching, it is getting timed out before that. So these are the things which you need to look at using these profiling tools, like as I mentioned that AppDynamics or New Relic or Monetis. These can give you the better picture of your application. Verifying DynaCache implementation. Sound caching strategy is imperative to the performance of any business. As I said that DynaCache, data caching, server-side caching. If for example, if there's any other Java application, if there's no caching, that may works, maybe or may satisfy the customer needs. But if it is a WebSphere commerce application, and if there's no server-side caching, that would give your customer a very hard time. I mean, because in WebSphere Commerce, almost all the data which is being displayed by the customer, displayed to the customer, is coming from the database, and you don't want your application to hit your database, for every call and to fetch that data. So server-side caching, command caching, data caching is very important in terms of WebSphere Commerce application performance. If you want your application to give you a better response time, a response time which your customer expects on the e-commerce side to do a smooth checkout, you must have to have this DynaCaching implemented in a very thoughtful way. As I said, IBM has also given that extended cache monitor application, which you can use to see how much your caching is being used when the requests are being hit, are being coming on your web server, and are being coming on your application server. Which even in that cache monitor application, you can go to the individual request and see whether that request is being served by the cache or by the server itself. So a sound caching strategy is imperative to the performance of any business application. WebSphere DynaCache provides a robust caching framework. WebSphere Commerce, in line with the framework, allows great flexibility to implement. Again, I mean, if I talk about just the B2B side, or even some portion of the B2C, the caching techniques which like the cache spec.xml, which WebSphere Commerce provides, you can even cache the fragment of the JSP. You can cache the full page, you can cache the partial page, so it gives you great flexibility to play with the cache spec.xml. For example, if you don't want to cache, let's say there's a JSP, and then there are a couple of other JSPs which are getting included in that JSP, and if you want one of those JSP to be excluded from the cache, and rest of the JSPs you want to be cached, that is also something which is achievable using that cache spec.xml. You can if you want, you can just exclude one of the JSPs by providing one simple line by defining one simple line in the cache spec.xml, and that you will see that JSP would be excluded from the cache if that JSP, for example, is serving any dynamic data. Caching is best implemented as a planned activity, not as a retrofitting activity. As I said, that caching can also destroy a site. I mean, it can gives your customer a data which they don't want to see. For example, just giving you an example, if your caching is not properly implemented, once your customer submits an order, he would expect to see that the cart becomes empty. But if your caching is not implemented properly for this cart page, your cart still will contain that information of the customer items, which customer don't want to see. So this kind of problems can come, if your caching is not properly implemented, not thoughtfully implemented. You have not planned or you have not designed the strategies before you have implemented the caching. Especially in an environment where there's lots of customization has been made. Architects needs to design the application with caching in mind, making sure that the ability to cache is exploited to the utmost of every business functionality. And this is what I've already defined. Verifying DynaCache implementation. A methodology to verify caching implementation is to set up through the following for each cacheable servlet page. So as I said that there are a number of tools available where you can check how your cache is working. These are the options which you can use, like clear the cache. So you have the cache monitor application which you can use to clear your cache, your server-side cache. Then access the page once to populate that. Now, for example, if I've cleared the cache and now if I'm hitting the site, it means there's no cache on the website on my server side. And when I hit the home page, all would be served by the server. Now, this would be the first request which would be served by the server itself without caching. But once the request would come to the server and that view or the JSP entry is in the cache spec.xml, that command entry is defined to be cached, then it would be cached by the server, and the next consecutive request would be served from the cache for that customer, or for that session, or for that data which customer needs. So access the page once to populate the cache, access the page again but this time collect database in Java code profiles. So for example, if you have already accessed that page first time, you would see that the second time page won't hit the database again for the same data to be fetched. Verify Java profile trace read that no business logic code is being executed except that do not cache fragments. Now, again, I mean, as I said, that once the contents or the data being served by the or stored by the cache, then we can we can check using the cache monitor app that again that command or that that code is not being called to serve the same contents to the customer, except those fragments which are like which you have already excluded that not to be cached using this do not cache attribute in the cache spec.xml. Cache configuration and setup needs to be revisited if results from step 4 or 5. So again, I mean, if for example you are seeing that in the consecutive request also the same code or the same logic or the same command, same SQLs are being called, it means your cache is not properly designed. You will have to revisit your cache spec.xml and see what is going wrong where you have make the you may have to make some changes to make that workable. Tuning and performance activities, configure performance test environment, review and act upon profiling and caching findings, develop test scripts. Now this is again would be, Nabil would be the one who would be covering like, how you execute the test scripts, how you prepare the test scripts, and then, based on those, when you run the load test, then you identify the areas. Okay, these are the areas which are giving us a problem. Like for example, if your customer wants to that 1,000 requests or maybe 10,000 requests should be served in a minute time, and you are not getting that benchmark in your load test, then you need to look at the areas. What are the areas which are giving us problem? Again, the two main areas to look at is the server side caching and the client side caching. The client side parameters in the HTTP conf file and the server side parameters in the cache spec.xml. And again, the third thing would be the network, which we talked about. And then again, tune those parameters and repeat the same test scripts. Configure performance environment. Do not assume defaults are appropriate. As I said that you can take the cache spec.xml, the default cache spec.xml, which are being provided for B2B and B2C sites, but they can be taken as a starting point. And if they are giving you the right behavior, right response time which you want, then you should be okay with that. But if you are not getting the required results because you do have included some customization in your checkout flow, in your catalog navigation, then that default caching files would not be enough. Then based on again, I said that based on the benchmark numbers, the baseline numbers which your customer wants to see, you would have to tune these parameters, the thread pools, the connection pools parameters at the server side. These are again the server side parameters. At the client side, you will have to check with the expiry headers, this gzip compression, keep alive settings, maximum connection a web server can handle. Each tier in the system has some basic parameters. A list is provided, but the setting depends on the hardware in most cases. Now again, like for example, if you have tuned all the parameters on all three tiers, web server, application server, and database tier, but even then if you are not getting the desired results, then again you will have to see at the network level or at the hardware level, like is your hardware is not saturating, is your hardware is capable enough to handle that load. Like for hardware is like is like a vehicle engine. So if your engine is not capable of handling let's say that much load, you can put as much you can tune the parameters the way you want, but they won't give you the desired results because you don't have the hardware to to handle that much load. So for in that aspect, you will have to go to the hardware side and will have to resize that what needs to be improved, whether it is the CPU which is giving you problem, or whether it is the memory which is giving you the problem. These are the two major hardware components which mostly involve in the performance tuning. One is the CPU, other one is the memory. So either if your CPU is being utilized consistently in your peak hours to 100% or 90%, then it means you may have to see, if at the same time, if you have checked your all these parameters, these server side parameters, your code leaks, or if they are all fine, and even then the CPU is highly utilized, then it means you may have to improve or add another CPU to your hardware. Same goes with the memory. These are some performance tuning parameters which I already explained, but I'll just go over the web server plugin, JVM configurations, which includes your memory settings, the minimum and maximum memory, JVM memory which you set at the application server side, web container thread pools, JDBC connection pools, DynaCache settings. What is the DynaCache size which you are setting? Data caching sizes. There are different data caching instances, and each instances has its own caching size which you need to configure. Solar has its own caching way of, that Solar has its own data caching instances which you need to configure. Database site, marketing, promotions, Solar search tuning. So yeah, so this is all from my side, from performance tuning side. It was more from the from the technical side which I wanted to go over. Again, I mean, from the business perspective, you all know, I mean, everyone knows that if from the business perspective, from the customer perspective, if customer is having a good time on the site, if he's having a smooth checkout flow and a quick checkout flow, then that is the main thing which customer wants. And once, if customer is satisfied, then he'll again come back to your site and will do the shopping. So that will make obviously your business grow. So performance tuning is always has always been a repetitive process. Once in a month, once in a quarter, twice in a quarter, and especially at the time of when you are releasing a big module, or when you are deploying a big release which involves lots of code changes, then at that time you have to do a performance reload testing before you go for a release in the deploy that on the production environment. Okay, so now from the performance testing perspective, Nabil would be covering the rest of the slides. So I'll make Nabil presenter. Thank you very much. Thanks all for attending this session.